lesson in Unit 1 is on absolute value. How do I find the absolute value? Of numbers and variables. Absolute value is the distance between the origin and a point representing the real number on the number line. The symbol for absolute value looks like two straight bars. If I wanted to find the absolute value of 5, I would start at the origin, 0, and I will count the spaces up to 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The absolute value of 5 is 5. If I want to find the absolute value of -3, I start at the origin, and I'll count the spaces to -3. 1, 2, 3. The absolute value of -3 is 3. The absolute value of a number is always positive. So for example, the absolute value of 117 will equal 117. If I started at 0, I would count 117 spaces up to the number 117. The absolute value of 0 is 0. There are no spaces to count. The absolute value of -217 is 217. If I started at 0, I would count 217 spaces until I reached that number. Now on our graphing calculators, we can find absolute value two ways. Sorry about that. All right. First, from the catalog, we have to press the second key, which is in the upper left-hand corner of your calculator. And then the word catalog is above the 0. The very first option is ABS. That stands for absolute value. So I'll press enter. And let's say I want to find the absolute value of -12. Make sure you arrow out of the absolute value symbol before you press enter. The absolute value of -12 is 12. If I wanted to find the absolute value of 15, second, catalog, absolute value, 15, arrow out, enter. The second way to find absolute value using your calculator is using the math menu. Math is located on the left side, 2 buttons below second. I have to arrow over to number. And the first option is absolute value. The absolute value of 23 is 23. Using the same method, I'll find the absolute value of -7. Math, number, absolute value, -7. And the answer is +7. So a couple of things to watch out for next. First, this negative sign outside the absolute value symbol really means -1 times the absolute value of 43. I need to find that absolute value first. So I have -1 times the absolute value of 43 is 43. And -1 times 43 is -43. Looking at the second example here, This is again negative 1 times the absolute value of negative 72. Find your absolute value first. So negative 1 times the absolute value of negative 72 is positive 72. And negative 1 times 72 is negative 72. The absolute value of the number was positive, but then I had to multiply by a coefficient of negative 1. The absolute value of variables is a little different. We know the answer. In this example, we know the answer has to be a positive 5. So if I start at 0, I can count 5 spaces up, and I'm at positive 5. However, I could also count 5 spaces down, and I would be at negative 5. When you take the absolute value of a variable, there are always two answers, a positive answer and a negative answer, because I can go up the number line or I can go down the number line. Another thing to keep in mind as you're working through absolute value problems is that the absolute value symbol works just like parentheses in order of operations. If you have an operation like addition, subtraction, multiplication, or division inside the absolute value symbol, you have to do the operation first, then take the absolute value of your answer. So as I look at this first example, the absolute value of 6 minus 19, I have to do 6 minus 19 first. So 6 minus 19 is negative 13. Now I take the absolute value of that sum. The absolute value of negative 13 is positive 13. Again, I need to do what's inside the absolute value symbol first. So negative 12 times negative 3 is positive 36. And now I take the absolute value of 36, which is 36. I need to do the operation inside the absolute value symbol first. 2 divided by negative 4 is negative 1/2. The absolute value of negative 1/2 is positive 1/2. This is a good opportunity to remind you on how to use your graphing calculator for fractions. 2 divided by negative 4. Our graphing calculator is going to give us a decimal. In algebra, I only want a decimal answer if there was a decimal in the problem. So I need to turn this decimal into a fraction. I can do that by pressing Math, 1, Enter. And your graphing calculator will always give you a fraction in simplified form, negative 1/2. To finish our last example, I have to add first. So negative 9 plus 17 is positive 8. And the absolute value of 8 is 8. This style of note-taking is called Cornell notes. We need to write a summary that wraps up the lesson and talks about what's important. So our essential question was, how do I find the absolute value of numbers and variables? Our summary needs to answer that question. The absolute value of numbers is the distance of the number from 0 it is always positive. the absolute value of a variable has two answers. One that is positive and one that is negative. In addition to summarizing the lesson, you want to go back through the notes. And over here in the left-hand column, you want to write some questions. To begin with, I just defined absolute value. That's why that went here on the left-hand side. Right about here, we started talking about using the graphing calculator. So how do I use my graphing calculator? To find absolute value. The next section talked about multiplying by a coefficient. How do I multiply by a coefficient? The next section of notes talked about finding the absolute value of a variable. And the last sections of notes for this lesson talked about performing an operation inside the absolute value symbol. So how do I solve a problem with an operation and absolute value? You do not have to use my questions in my summary. Those are study tools meant to help you. For the first couple of lessons, I will model a summary and some questions. And then after that, I'm going to quit modeling those for the Cornell notes because I want you to develop your own. This is the end of the first lesson.